There is something we all need to experience more of, more frequently, in order to obtain a better sense of balance in life. We need it so that we can be more efficient and effective at work, in our business, so that we can do the important stuff to a higher level, so that we can get what we need to get done in less time, all with the goal of buying back some time, energy, and focus so that you can experience more energy in the tank for other parts of your life that matter just as much, if not more, such as your presence with your family, prioritizing your health, training, quiet time without distraction so you can decompress, and opportunities to learn new things that have nothing to do with your business or your work. That thing is the state of flow. So far, in this series, we've built 3 layers. Episode 1, the 5 rules that determine whether you wake up restored or running with a ball and chain around your ankle. Episode 2, the 3 behaviors in the first 90 minutes that activate your brain and body correctly. And episode 3, the 90-second mental bridge from home to work and the physical space that protects that state once you enter it. If you've not watched any of the first 3 episodes, then please stop what you're doing right now and go back to them. It's important that we implement and action these strategies in the order that I am presenting them to you. If you've implemented what we've covered across those 3 episodes, then here's where you are right now. You're sleeping well, you're waking up and getting natural light within 30 minutes, you're delaying caffeine for 60 to 90 minutes after waking up, you're moving your body or taking a cold shower so that you can raise your core temperature. Before you start your first work block, you're doing the transition routine, 60 seconds of priming your identity. And you've engineered your environment so your phone is in another room or out of the way, out of reach. Your noise is consistent, your desk is clear, and your notifications are off. You've built all of the important foundations. Now you're no doubt feeling the benefits right away if you're genuinely doing your best to stick to it at least 90% of the time, of course. Now the question is, when you sit down to actually do the work, what happens? Not what should happen, not what you hope will happen, what actually happens reliably when all of these conditions are in place? The answer should be flow state. And this video is about how you can enter it on demand. Flow is a term that gets thrown around casually. People say that they were in flow the way they say that they were in the zone or locked in. It sounds vague and it sounds like a feeling, but it's not. It was named and extensively studied by a psychologist called Mihaly Csikszentmihalyi, who spent decades researching the subjective experience of optimal performance. And what he found is that flow is a specific, reproducible, psychological state with a distinct set of characteristics. Time typically distorts, hours pass in what feel like minutes, or a single moment expands and you're processing information at a rate that feels normally impossible. Self-consciousness disappears, you stop monitoring yourself, you stop wondering how you're doing it or what someone would think of what you're producing. The activity itself becomes the reward. You're not doing it to finish it, you're doing it because the doing is intrinsically satisfying and enjoyable. And critically, for the purpose of this series, cognitive performance in flow is dramatically higher than in non-flow states. Faster processing, more creative connections, higher quality output with less perceived effort. Flow is not a mystical state reserved for musicians, artists, and elite athletes. It's a psychological phenomenon with a specific entry conditions. You can't force it on command. Nobody can, but you can build the conditions that make it more likely. And the difference between hoping for flow and building for flow is the difference between occasionally having a great work session and reliably entering deep productive states across your week. Everything we've covered so far in this series, sleep, wakefulness, transition routines, environmental design, that's all the platform, the foundation. Flow is the output that drives cognitive performance, and your tasks and to-dos are fulfilled more consistently and efficiently when you're in this state. Csikszentmihalyi's research identified 3 conditions that make flow more likely. Each of them is actionable, And most people, most men who struggle to enter a flow state are missing at least one of them without realizing it. So condition 1 is having clear goals. The brain enters flow more readily when it knows without ambiguity what it is trying to do. Now this sounds obvious, but it's not as obvious in practice, because most people sit down to work with something that is not necessarily a goal. Instead, they sit with an intention, such as work on the report, or make progress on the presentation, or do some writing, send those emails. An intention is vague, and vagueness forces your brain into a mode that's fundamentally incompatible with flow. You're not immersed in the task. You're standing above the task, deciding what the task even is. You're micromanaging yourself. You're subconsciously asking yourself, what should I do next? How should I start? What does progress even mean? Every one of those questions pulls you out of work and into a decision-making loop that you can't get out of. A clear goal is different. A clear goal is something like draft the introduction and the first 2 sections of the report, or write the argument section of the proposal, roughly 800 words, or analyze Q2 data and produce 3 specific insights with visualizations. Notice what those have in common. They're concrete, they name the output, they have a scope, they're specific, and you know when you're done. They remove the most expensive cognitive operation of all, which is deciding what to do next. The practical application is pretty simple. Before starting any work block, write down the single most important thing that you will accomplish in that block. And I'll talk more about these blocks in a minute. You're not trying to create a to-do list. You're not trying to create 5 things. You're trying to focus on one. And if you finish it and there's time remaining, then yeah, you can move on to the next. But the entry point is singular. You know exactly what you're doing, no ambiguity, and your brain can stop asking the subconscious questions and start doing the work. Condition 2, immediate feedback. Flow depends on a tight feedback loop. The brain needs to know moment to moment whether what it's doing is working. This is easier in some activities than in others. So if you're coding, for example, the feedback is instant. Does the code run? Does it work? If you're writing, the feedback is almost instant. Does the sentence or the paragraph read well? If you're designing, then you might be able to see whether the thing looks right. But some kinds of work have long feedback loops. Things like strategy or long-term planning, trying new sales methods, creative direction. The real feedback on these things arrive potentially weeks or even months later. And that gap, the space between action and feedback, is a flow killer. The brain disengages when it can't track whether it's on course. So the trick is to manufacture shorter feedback loops artificially. You break the work into small, verifiable units. If you're writing, the unit is a paragraph, maybe. You know immediately whether it works. If you're analyzing data, the unit might be a single insight or a single chart. If you're doing strategy, the unit might be a completed section of the document or a single articulation of a core idea. If you're working through your finances, you might record, describe, and break down just 1 week at a time. Now, in the Marines, we call this chunking, the act of breaking something down, breaking something hard down into manageable chunks that makes the entire task feel less overwhelming and more doable. It's great for overcoming procrastination, and if you can combine it with other considerations around flow, then you can make a task you'd previously avoid something that you might actually find enjoyment in or get reward from. Now, each completed unit or section, chunk, provides a micro hit of feedback, and that feedback is what is rewarding. It tells the brain that we're on track, keep going, and that reward is what keeps the flow loop running. The smaller the unit or the section or the chunk, the tighter the loop, the easier it is to stay immersed in whatever it is that you're trying to do. Condition 3, challenge, skill, balance. This is one of the most things that people get wrong or overlook, and it explains why you procrastinate on certain kinds of work. Flow occurs at the intersection of high challenge and high skill. If the challenge exceeds your skill, you don't enter flow. You enter anxiety. You feel overwhelmed. You feel frustration. The gap between what you're trying to do and what you feel capable of doing is too wide. And your brain responds by trying to escape the situation, which is exactly what procrastination is. If your skill exceeds the challenge, you don't enter flow, you enter boredom. The work feels beneath you. It doesn't demand enough of your attention to pull you in. Your mind wanders, you get distracted, you reach for your phone, you're looking for stimulation because the task isn't providing any at all. Flow lives in the space between those two states. It's sometimes called the stretch zone, just beyond your current comfort level. Demanding enough that you have to pay attention, but not so demanding that you feel out of your depth. If you find yourself procrastinating on a task, the problem is almost always that the challenge feels too high relative to your current perceived skill. You're looking at the entire mountain and feeling unequipped to climb it. And the fix is not to try harder, discipline, willpower. The fix is to try and task down until the challenge skill ratio feels manageable. Not the whole report, just the first paragraph. Not the entire presentation, just the opening slide. If you lower the bar until you feel like the task itself is too simple to put off and delay, you'll enter flow. If you're bored, on the other hand, if the work feels too easy, increase the stakes. Set a higher deadline. Aim for a higher standard. Add a constraint that makes the work harder. For example, I'll write this in half the time, or I'll write this without using a single adjective, or I'll write this as if it's going to be read by one person whose opinion matters most. Constraint creates engagement, and engagement creates flow. Now, there's one more structural piece that really matters, and we can't forget about this, and it's biological. It's really important. And I now base my entire work diary off of this one key factor, and that is that the brain operates in roughly 90-minute cycles of heightened and reduced alertness. And these are called ultradian rhythms. During the peak of an ultradian cycle, your capacity for sustained attention and deep cognitive work is at its highest. During the trough, it declines. And attempting to force deep focus during a trough is both ineffective and draining. You're ultimately fighting your own neurobiology. Now, most blokes don't know this, so they try and sustain deep focus for 3, maybe 4 hours continuously. And what happens is they get 90 minutes of maybe decent work in, followed by 2 hours of frustrated, low-quality output. And the total output is ultimately worse. The experience is miserable. The smarter approach is to align your work blocks with the brain's natural rhythm. So work for 90 minutes at full intensity, then take a genuine break, maybe 15 to 20 minutes at least. Now, this is not a break where you check your email or scroll LinkedIn. It's a real break. Movement, walk, have a tea or a coffee for the sake of sitting with it, enjoying it, no distractions. I like to save my morning coffees for these breaks rather than having a coffee whilst I'm working. And during this break, you want to be doing non-cognitive activity. Let the brain cycle through its trough and reset. Then you begin the next 90-minute work block. Now, this isn't slacking, it's not being lazy. Maybe smokers get this unintentionally right. Scheduling your most important work during these cycles is alignment with the brain's natural rhythm. 2 90-minute blocks with a proper break in between them will typically produce more high-quality output than 5 hours of just trying to grind through the trough. More output, higher quality, less time demand. Exactly what we want as busy men looking to improve the quality of our lives. Now, there's one last thing that blocks flow. One last thing that I'm going to touch on in this video, and it's the most insidious because you don't even notice it's happening. And this is open loops, otherwise known as unfinished tasks, unresolved decisions, commitments that your brain is holding on to in the background. These occupy working memory. And during a focused work block, they surface as intrusive thoughts. You're halfway through a paragraph and suddenly you remember that you need to reply to that email. Maybe you're deep in analysis and your brain reminds you that you haven't booked flights for next month's trip. You're trying to write and you can't stop thinking about the conversation you need to have with your partner. Each of these is an open loop, and your brain is keeping them active because it's afraid that it will forget them. The part of your mind responsible for keeping commitments doesn't trust you to remember, so it keeps pinging you spontaneously, often when you least want it to. Now, David Allen, who wrote Getting Things Done, identified this problem and offered a simple solution. Externalize every open loop into a trusted system before you begin focused work. Write down everything you're holding on to in your head. tasks that you need to do later, conversations that you need to have, ideas that you don't want to lose. The act of writing it down tells your brain that it's now safe. It's captured and you can let go of it, move on with what you need to focus on. Now, this can be incorporated into the transition routine from the last video. After priming your identity in the morning, after asking, who do I need to be? Spend 60 seconds just dumping any open loops onto a piece of paper or maybe your notes app on your phone. Anything that's occupying your mental space, get it out of your head and onto the page. Then close the page and begin doing what you need to do. So here is the full sequence for entering a flow block. This is what we've covered in this video. You've done the transition routine, you've primed your identity, your environment is set up, your phone is away, noise is consistent, your desk is clear. Before you start, you write down the one thing you're going to accomplish in this block, a single, clear, specific goal. Not a list, one clear output. You do a 60-second open loop dump, anything occupying mental space goes onto the page, and then the page is closed. You break the work into small units, the smallest verifiable chunks that gives you feedback, a paragraph, a section, an insight, and you work for around 90 minutes. Not 3 hours, not until you're exhausted or your next thing on the diary. 90 minutes of full attention, and then you have a proper break, and then you repeat that cycle. That is how you enter flow. It's not complicated, it's deliberate, and it works not because it forces the brain into submission, but because it aligns with how the brain actually operates biologically. Now, I remember a time not too long ago when I'd be in the shower and I'd have a great idea. Ultimately, for me, going for a walk without my phone or being in the shower were 2 moments in my day when I'd be able to organically problem solve and come up with great ideas because I wasn't distracted by external noise, notifications, or other people. Now, this idea might be a piece of content, might be a solution to one of my clients' problems or challenges. But in the time it'd take me to get from getting out the shower and getting dry, I'd often forget about this idea. I'd get really angry and frustrated with myself. It's so important you understand that your brain is great for manufacturing ideas, but it's terrible for holding on to them. If you can't do something with that information, it will create an open loop that will distract you from the flow state that you're wanting to enter on a daily basis. Whatever ideas you have, whatever is distracting your mind, get it written down on paper or in your notes app. Now, at this point, we've covered everything structural: sleep, morning activation, transition, environment, flow. What's left are the marginal gains, the things that sit on top of a well-built foundation and sharpen the edge. The more sexy and exciting, interesting stuff that most blokes want to know more about. And I've said this a million times, but these small interventions that yield marginal gains are only as effective as the foundations that they're built on. If you're going to watch the next episodes, do make sure that you're actioning and implementing the steps that the 4 episodes have covered that you've watched so far, including this one. A bloke who is sleeping 5 hours a night will not feel a meaningful cognitive improvement from what you're about to discuss in the next few videos. But a bloke who has dialed everything in that we've covered across these first 4 episodes so far will absolutely feel and recognize the benefit. If you want the nutritional tactics that sharpen the window you've just learned to protect, the next video in the series is on screen now. Click through and I'll see you there. If you're watching this as part of the full cognitive output series, then the link to the entire playlist is in the description below.